Welcome back to the Timeless Investor Show. I am Ari Van Gemeren, real estate fund manager, student of history, and your guide through the wreckage of financial disasters past and present. Picture this. It's 1720, Paris. A Scottish murderer on the run has just become the richest man who ever lived. He controls France's money supply, its entire colonial trade, and its tax collection. He's created the world's first stock market bubble. In about 6 months, he'll flee the country dressed as a woman, leaving behind economic devastation that will echo all the way to the French Revolution. This is the story of John Law, gambler, genius, and the man who proved that if you give a degenerate gambler control of an entire nation's money supply, he'll do exactly what you'd expect. Create money out of thin air, pump asset prices to the moon, and leave everyone else holding the bag when it all comes crashing down. Does that sound familiar to you? Because it should. Because John Law didn't just create history's first modern financial crisis. He wrote the playbook that central bankers are still following today. They just don't want you to know about it. This will mark the first episode in a longer-running series that I'm still working on a name for, but let's just call it The Cons, or maybe The Villains. My former boss, the great Ken Fisher, wrote a terrific book back in the day called How to Smell a Rat, and it really gave me the idea here. What if we also study the long and sordid history of financial manipulators, villains, and con artists? Why not, I say? Why not? The other series I'm going to launch for the Timeless Investor Show is going to be another running one called The Bubbles, or maybe The Crashes, or something like this. The sordid history of crashes, debt default, you name it, we're going to learn from it. And then, of course, what you all know and love and have been listening to already as is new is the old series, and the series we're going to call The Builders, which is focused on great wealth creators, real estate entrepreneurs, emperors, madmen, whatever they are, people that have done something amazing. So without further ado, let's get into John Law. And I want to add a quick note on him as well. You know, we posted this article last week on the Timeless Investor newsletter about the Dutch tulip bulb mania, if you will. And somebody commented on it and said, well, you forgot the greatest fraudster of them all, John Law. And I replied, well, we'll definitely cover him at some point. So today is that day. And this, guys, is a truly unbelievable story. And the premise of the villains or the cons, again, the name is in the works. So if you have ideas, let me know. I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys. But the premise here is very similar to Ken's book, How to Smell a Rat. How to protect yourself from financial fraudsters better than to know their story and understand what they did so you are better armed in this world filled with people that want to get their hands in your pocket. How do you protect yourself? Education is power. Knowing what has come before, the Jordan Belforts of the world, knowing their stories, knowing how they manipulated people, how they got away with what they did is really, really, really valuable. So let's launch. John Law was born in 1671 in Edinburgh, the son of William Law, a goldsmith and a moneylender who had purchased Lauriston Castle on the Firth of Forth. His family were not just merchants, they were bankers, part of the ancient tradition of Scottish financiers who understood money at a deep level. Law's education focused on mathematics, political economy, commerce, and economics. Think about that for just a second. This is the 1680s. Most people can barely read. Law is studying probability theory and advanced mathematics. He's being groomed and trained to understand systems, how money moves, how odds work, how to see the patterns that other people miss. So when his father died in 1688, Law inherited the family estates and wealth. He was 17 years old, rich, brilliant, and completely unsupervised. What could possibly go wrong? How about everything? He went to London and he gambled away his fortune in a very short period of time. And in the process, though, he became an expert gambler, using his mathematical and statistical genius to win card games by mentally calculating the odds. Let that sink in for a moment. The man was a 1680s version of Rain Man. This guy was so good at math, he could calculate card probability in his head faster than most people can add. He wasn't gambling, he was running statistical models in real time. This is 1690, and Law is basically a human computer. He spent his mornings in the city, where he got a reputation for skill in speculating on government paper. He passed his afternoons in the parks, his evenings at the opera, the theater, and the later hours at balls, masquerades, and gaming houses. Classic high roller lifestyle. But here's where it gets dark. On April 9th, 1694, John Law fought a duel with another British dandy, if you will, Edward Bow Wilson in Bloomsbury Square, London. Wilson had challenged Law over the affections of Elizabeth Villiers, something like this. This wasn't some back alley brawl. This is like in the movies. This was a formal duel, swords drawn, seconds present, the whole aristocratic ritual. Law draws his own sword. They fight. Law strikes Wilson. Wilson falls down and dies. One thrust, one dead body. Law is 23 years old, and he's just killed a man over a woman. Now, it's important to note, and I can't say this with 100% certainty, but dueling was very common, but to kill the other person was not. So Law was actually arrested and charged with murder, and he stood trial at Old Bailey. He appeared before the infamously sadistic hanging judge and was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. That's the end of our story. That's the end of him, right? Wrong. Law is arrested. He's convicted of murder and sentenced to death, but then he escapes from prison. The details are murky. People who study this say it's likely that he clearly had some help from the outside, and somebody maybe even drugged a guard and let him out of his cell. So now we have Law, who is a convicted murderer, death sentence hanging over his head on the run in Europe. And this is where the story gets juicy and interesting. Not that it hasn't already been juicy and interesting. By the way, I love to say this about history. You cannot make this stuff up. Like you can't like there's nothing in there's nothing in like Game of Thrones or modern day movies or TV shows that hasn't literally happened, right? I mean, it's amazing. Stranger than fiction, right? Whatever they say. So for the next 20 years, Law wanders Europe like some kind of financial Ronin. Amsterdam, Venice, Rome, Copenhagen. He's gambling, but he's also studying. He's watching how the Dutch East India Company works. He's seeing how Venice manages its currency. He's understanding and learning systems. So while Law was a somewhat bad character, who in his continental travels has spent his mornings studying finance and the principles of trade, and the evenings in the gaming houses of Europe. And somewhere in those gaming houses and trading floors, Law has an epiphany, a dangerous epiphany. Gold and silver are holding back economic growth. They're too scarce. What if, stay with me here, you could create money that wasn't backed by metal? What if you could create purchasing power out of paper? This is 1700. This idea is insane. Money is gold and silver. That's been true for thousands of years. But Law sees some things others don't. Money isn't the metal. Money is confidence. Money is belief. Money is a collective hallucination. And if you can control the hallucination, you can control everything else. I've said this many times. Fiat currency, and any currency really, even gold, is something that runs at the speed of trust. Trust. Gold has no real value other than the value that we ascribe to it, right? I would argue there's some things that have real value. Housing, I think, has real value. Some things do. Gold, paper currency, they have value we ascribe to it. They run at the speed of trust. As long as that trust survives, you'll take whatever it is. The second you don't trust it, you won't take it. Everybody in the world suddenly decided that fake paper dollars were real, then, some kids will look really rich right now. But here's the key thing. If suddenly someone pointed out they were fake, nobody would take them anymore and the whole system would fall apart. So Law has this idea, brilliant idea. So let's fast forward to 1715. Louis XIV, the Sun King, is finally dead after ruling France for 72 years. The French government was teetering on the verge of insolvency under the burden of debts incurred during the War of Spanish Succession. The new king, Louis XV, is 5 years old. So, of course, real power lies with the regent, Philippe d'Orléans. Hope you like my French accent. D'Orléans. And Philippe has a problem. Actually, he has several problems. The government was deeply in debt and taxes were high. The wars have completely bankrupted the country and the nobility simply won't pay the taxes. And the peasants can't pay more. The kingdom is broke. So enter John Law, now in his 40s, still brilliant, still dangerous, and friends with the Duke. The Duke of Orleans in English, the leader of a group of regents, soon decided to seek the counsel of his good friend, John Law. So Law pitches on something revolutionary. I can solve all of your problems. I can pay off the debt. I can restart the economy. I can make France rich again. How? Paper money, monsieur, paper money. So in 716, Law received the French government's permission to establish a national bank, the Banque Générale, which took in deposits of gold and silver and issued paper banknotes in return. Think about what's happening here. A convicted murderer who escaped from British prison is now running a French bank. You literally cannot make this stuff up. But here's the genius part. It worked at first. Paper money was way more convenient than hauling around gold coins. It could be printed to match economic growth. Trade increased. The economy started moving again. And Law looked like a genius. So they let him go bigger. So a year later, he established the Compagnie d'Occident, the Company of the West. And if any of you speak French, please pardon my pronunciation. My wife would say I need speech therapy. I appreciate your patience here. And he obtained for the Company of the West exclusive privileges to develop the vast French territories in the Mississippi River Valley of North America. Now, let me explain what vast French territories means. We're talking about the entire Mississippi River Basin, from New Orleans to basically Canada, modern-day Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. It's absolutely massive. And nobody in France has any idea what's actually there. So this is where Law's gambler instincts kick in. He doesn't need real assets. He needs a story. And does he have one? Gold, silver, furs, unlimited agricultural land, friendly natives eager to trade. The Mississippi territory is presented as El Dorado meets the Garden of Eden. The marketing is incredible. You got to admire it. Law commissions pamphlets showing mountains of gold, docile natives, fertile lands beyond imagination. It's all BS, but it doesn't matter because Law understands something fundamental. In a bubble, perception is reality. So here's where Law goes full Dr. Lex Luthor supervillain. Law's company also soon monopolized the French tobacco and African slave trades, and by 1798, the Company of the Indies, as it had been named, held a complete monopoly of France's colonial trade. So stop and think about that. One company now controls all trade with North America, all trade with Africa, all trade with Asia, the slave trade, the tobacco trade. But Law's not done. Law also took over the collection of French taxes and the minting of money. In effect, he controlled both the country's foreign trade and its finances. This is properly insane. One man now controls the money supply, tax collection, all foreign trade, the national debt. There's literally never been this much financial power concentrated in one person's hands. Not before, not since. So the market price of company shares eventually reached the peak of 10,000 livres. They started at 500. That's a 20x return. The mania was extraordinary. In one instance, a distant relative of the regent murdered a wealthy jobber with a view to stealing his Mississippi stock. People were literally killing each other for shares. Everyone wants in. Nobles, merchants, servants, priests, prostitutes, everyone is buying Mississippi shares. The word millionaire is invented during this period because so many people became millionaires overnight. A footman buys a few shares, they go up, he buys more, they go up more, he's suddenly rich enough to buy a chateau. Stories like this are everywhere. John Law is made the equivalent of a prime minister of France. He's made the contrôleur général des finances, controlling general of finance. Now, it is quite extraordinary. I mean, you could imagine a media headline. Convicted Scottish murderer who escaped prison becomes a prime minister of France and causes the world's first proper stock market boom. So at the peak, Law's wealth was staggering. He bought a dozen country estates, several mansions in Paris, a bunch of diamonds, a library worth of 45,000 books. The library alone would be worth tens of millions of dollars today. He actually wrote to somebody and he said, I am probably the richest man who's ever been. And he might have been right. The Mississippi Company at its peak was worth the equivalent of $6.5 trillion today. Law personally owed a significant stake. His net worth in modern terms would have been in the hundreds of billions. But here's the thing about paper wealth. It's only real until people stop believing in it. Reminds me of all the pre-IPO entrepreneurs I knew back in the day in San Francisco when I was on Wall Street and, lending on their stock, borrowing on their stock, and then poof, market fell out. What happens then? Oh, it wasn't real. Funny money, we call it. So as the shareholders were selling their shares, the money in supply in France suddenly doubled and inflation exploded, as you predict. as would happen with a paper-based economy that just prints nonstop, inflation reached a monthly rate of 23%, 1720, 23% per month. Prices are doubling every 3 months. A loaf of bread that cost 1 livre in January cost 8 livres by year end. The paper money is becoming worthless. Sounds like Weimar Germany. Sounds like Argentina. Sounds like Venezuela. Unfortunately, there's so many examples of this. So in mid-January 720, the share price begins to fall due to increasing attempts by investors to convert their capital gains into gold. Everybody wants out. And here's where law system hits reality like a brick wall. All those paper profits, people want to convert them to real gold, but there is not enough gold. There was never enough gold. That was the whole point of the paper money system. Law realized the price of a share in the Mississippi Company was vastly overestimated in comparison to the amount of gold, silver, and other commodities in the North American territory. He attempted a controlled slowdown by depreciating currency in the shares by half, but this triggered a selling frenzy. When you tell people their money is worth half what they thought, they don't usually calmly accept it. They usually panic and they run to the bank and they demand gold. So by September 1720, the price of shares in the company had fallen to 2,000 livres and to 1,000 by December. So by September 1721, share prices were down to 500, where they had been at the beginning. From 10,000 to 500. That's a 95% loss. But it's worse than that. And I like to say every crash is a debt story. Because remember, law had everyone leveraged to the eyeballs. People borrowed to buy shares. They used shares as collateral for more loans to buy more shares. When the shares crash, everything crashes. Compagnia investors were financially ruined, and many former millionaires became paupers. The social devastation was complete. Servants who became aristocrats overnight were servants again. Nobles who bet everything on law system were bankrupt. The middle class was eviscerated, destroyed, crushed. So soon after, John Law escaped France, disguised as a woman for his own safety. Let that image settle peacefully into your mind. The most powerful man in France, the richest man who ever lived, Controller General of Finances, the Duke, the Duke of Arkansas, is fleeing the country dressed in drag because if he's caught, he'll be torn apart by mobs. Now, he dies a poor man in Venice in 1729, 9 years wandering Europe, gambling in second-rate casinos, dying broke and alone. The Mississippi bubble didn't just destroy fortunes. It destroyed faith in government, in finance, and in the future itself. The collapse of Law's scheme resulted in a widespread revulsion against the stock market, and for decades slowed the development of French capitalism and industry. The Mississippi bubble had also dealt a death blow to the reputation and finances of the monarchy, paving the way for the French Revolution. How many times can we say that a proper, genuine, idiosyncratic, crazy, genius con artist set off events in motion that would change the face of Western Europe for all time? Think about that. The Mississippi bubble was 1720. The French Revolution was 1789. That's 69 years of festering resentment, of remembering how the government and the elites collaborated to, air quotes, rob everyone. It would be 80 years before France would again introduce paper money into its economy. 80 years. 3 generations of French people who wouldn't touch paper money because they remembered what John Law did. So what can we learn and what are the timeless principles here? First, every fiat currency system is a confidence game. Law understood this better than anyone. Money isn't gold. Money is belief. And belief can be manufactured, manipulated, or destroyed. And when you hear central bankers talk about managing expectations or forward guidance, they are playing Law's game. They are trying to control the collective hallucination that we exist in. Second, leverage is a weapon of mass destruction. And I've said this many times, and I'm going to keep saying it because it is a timeless principle and it is true. Law didn't just create a bubble. He created a leveraged bubble. People borrowed paper money to buy shares, used shares as collateral for more loans, borrowed more to buy more shares. Does that sound familiar? Because it should. It's also called 2008. It's called margin debt. It's called the everything bubble we're living in today, or have been for some time. Third, when the monopolists control money, taxes, and trade, it's time to run. Law's system concentrated every form of economic power in one entity. Today, we might call this too big to fail. We might call it systemically important financial institutions. We may call it, the Federal Reserve. Different names, same game. Fourth, bubbles need a story. The Mississippi Territory wasn't valuable. I hope you gathered from that long list of states I provided. No offense to any of those states, but what do any of them have that's intrinsically valuable, right? I mean, yes, they have some farmland, they have some cool culture and real estate now. Was there gold? We found oil, right? They had no idea about oil at the time. The story, air quotes, the story, all caps, of the Mississippi Territory was worth $6.5 trillion in today's money. What are today's stories? I don't know. I mean, there's differing opinions on these, but I'll give a few. AI will change absolutely everything. Bitcoin is digital gold. Tesla is not simply a car company. Same playbook, different century. Stories sell, part of our collective hallucination. We have to be mindful and look for it. Fifth, paper wealth is not real wealth. This is the most important lesson for real estate investors. Law's investors thought they were rich because their paper was worth 10,000 livres, but paper isn't wealth. Of course, it is if you can liquidate it in time, right? And that's the whole allure of the entire thing. And that is why people continue to fall for these traps over and over again. But just remember, in every single cycle like this, it goes up, 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 and nobody gets out because you're greedy, right? You're like, well, I don't want to get out now. What if it goes 2x more, 5x more, 10x more? And then when the collective hallucination falls apart, everybody rushes for the exit at one time and boom, there's nothing there. There's nothing to get out on, right? Pets.com. There's recent events that are just like this. Hell, I'm going to go real recent here. Let's just talk about NFTs for a half heartbeat. Talk about a thing that was a collective hallucination of humanity. I mean, the trading prices on these things were astronomical, insane. And like, if you were holding on to your NFT portfolio through that time, how do you feel right now? Probably not very good. It's probably gone. Like there's no value left to it, but everybody bought into it for a long, hot minute, just like the Mississippi Company, just like pets.com, just like any of these things that come and go. And just remember, it is not real wealth. It's fake, unless you can get out. If you sold your NFT at the height, kudos to you, ma'am. Great for you. That's awesome. But it's not a tried and true strategy that you could stick to. Cash flow is wealth. Productive assets are wealth. Everything else is just Law's confidence game with better technology wrapped around it today. These are some of the modern parallels that you should really be considering. The most frightening fact here is the fact that the Royal Bank's operations are nearly identical to the strategies of the US Federal Reserve. Let's be specific about this. Law's bank created money from nothing. Check. That's quantitative easing. Law used new money to buy government debt. Check. That's the Fed buying treasury bonds. Law pumped asset prices to create a wealth effect. Check. That's the everything bubble. Law said it would be temporary. Check. Transitory inflation, anyone? The difference between John Law and Jerome Powell, Law only destroyed one country's economy. The Fed, unfortunately, has the entire world on the hook. So here's what you need to understand. We're all living in John Law's system. Please think about that. A Scottish murderer on the run, prison escapee, helped build the system that we all live in today. I mean, think about that. Every central bank in the world is running some version of his playbook. Create money from nothing, pump asset prices, pray the confidence holds. But confidence is fragile. It can turn on a dime. One day you're the richest man who ever lived. The next day you're fleeing the country in a dress. So what do? You do what the smart money did in 1719. You take your paper profits and you convert them into real assets, real estate, productive businesses, things that generate cash flow, regardless of what the central bankers are playing. You understand that every bubble needs a greater fool, and you make damn sure you're not the greatest fool. You remember that John Law was brilliant, arguably one of the smartest financial minds who ever lived, and he still lost everything because in the end, reality doesn't particularly care how smart you are. Math doesn't care about your theories, and gravity will always win. Some of the similarities, and this is a great irony, with the personality of Keynes 200 years later are very striking. Keynes was a mathematician first and an economist second. Their approach was also similar. They see a problem and they try to find a solution instead of seeing a problem and trying to understand why it existed before solving it. That is the final lesson. Law saw France's debt problem and tried to solve it with financial engineering. He never asked why France was in debt, why the system was broken. He just tried to paper over the problems. Does it sound familiar? Again, it should. It's what every central bank has done since 2008. Don't fix the problems. Don't let bad debts clear. Don't let zombie companies fail. Just print more money, buy more assets, kick the can down the road. But here's what history teaches us. The can will always stop somewhere. And when it does, somebody's going to be left holding the bag. Just make sure it's not you. So John Law died in Venice in 1729, broke and forgotten, but his ideas have lived on. Every central banker who prints money from nothing is following his playbook. Every investor who leverages paper assets to buy more paper assets is playing Law's game. Every bubble that promises infinite returns from finite resources is just the Mississippi Company with a different name. The question isn't whether you're in a bubble. We're always in some kind of bubble. That's what fiat currency systems do ultimately create over and over again. The question is, are you John Law creating the bubble? Are you the French aristocrat writing the bubble? Or are you the servant buying at the top of borrowed money? Because in every bubble, those are the only three rules, and two of them end very badly. So choose wisely, build real wealth. Actually, I'm going to back it up and say all three of them ended pretty badly in that situation, right? John Law, broke and penniless and dead. The nobleman lost his noble seat. The peasant broke. Nobody's happy in that situation. So choose wisely, build real wealth. And remember, when everyone's getting rich on paper, that's when you need to be most careful about what's actually real. I hope this story has been illuminating for you. And whatever you do, don't give a gambler control of the money supply, even if, especially if, he's brilliant. This has been the Timeless Investor Show, the first episode of The Villains. I'm Ari Van Gemeren. Think well, act wisely, build something timeless. Until next time, I look forward to having you guys with us again. Have a wonderful day.